of all people, took him.
Okay, good afternoon. Today we'll conclude our discussion of last week's mishnah and start another one, hopefully. Antignos received the tradition from Shimon HaTzadik, and he used to say, "Do not be like servants who serve the master in the expectation of receiving a reward, but be like servants who serve the master without the expectation of receiving a reward, and let the fear of heaven be upon you." We went through this in great detail last week, so I'm not going to repeat everything we did last week. I just want to add something from the Rabbi, that actually there were 4 teachings over here, and it parallels 4 different levels of service to God. And the same thing could be applied to relationships with other people as well, because everything that relates to our relationship with God could also be translated into interpersonal relationships. In terms of relationship with God, the first level, the basic level, is the level of Yirah, which they translate as fear. It could mean fear, but even fear has different sides to it. One level of fear is, I'm afraid of punishment. You're afraid that if you do the wrong thing, some lightning will come down from heaven and strike you. That's the lowest level possible of your relationship with God, and as well as your relationship with others. A little bit more sophisticated kind of fear is your fear of the consequences of your negative actions. It's not that you're afraid that some lightning is going to come and strike you, but that what you're going to do is going to harm you. Anytime you do something negative, it has a negative impact on you, and you don't want that negative impact. You don't want to become deficient. You don't want to lose some of your integrity. You don't want to lose some of your dignity. That's the lowest level, and that's hinted in the words, don't be like a servant. A servant is someone who does what he has to do because he has a master. That's the definition of a servant. Or the word here for servant could also be translated as slave. It means both, a servant or slave, but the common denominator is that you have a sense of, I have to do what my master tells me, because if I don't, there'll be consequences. When you train young people in schools, in your parents teaching their children, there's one method of threatening them with consequences. That's the lowest possible level. And when you recognize that that's the lowest possible level, although it's better than nothing, it's when you have respect for authority because you're afraid of consequences, and you desist from doing something wrong, desist from committing a crime, that is 1,000 times better than nothing. Infinite better than nothing. If someone decides not to commit murder, I think I told you the story of my father when he was accosted by a inner city youth with a gun Friday night as he's coming home from shul, and the kid asked him for, the kid's about 12, 13 years old, asked him for his money, and of course Shabbos he's not going to be carrying money, and he can't explain that to this child, so he says to the child, "You're a good kid," and the kid says, "No, I'm bad." And then my father says to him, "Do you have a minister?" He said, "Yeah." "What do you think your minister would think if he knew what you're doing right now?" And he lowered his head and turns around and left. It could have been a murder, God forbid, but because he had some minimal vestige left of respect for higher authority, which most kids in America are not taught, and that's what's destroying the country. All the other theories about what's causing the country's downfall are all secondary, tertiary. The basic reason for all the problems is because we no longer have respect for higher authority. That's better than nothing, infinitely better than nothing, but it's not the ideal. The next level is don't serve your master with the intention, with the expectation of receiving a reward. That's the next level, which is called the level of love, the lower level of love. The first one is called the lower level of Yirah, of fear. This second one is called the lower level of love. You do things because you like to do things that are positive, because they bring you positive results. It's based on love. When you translate this in terms of God, you love God. You're not just fearful of Him, fearful of God's ability to punish you or to cause your harm, cause your life to be miserable, but it's because you develop a sense of love of God. To have love of God, it's a more sophisticated emotion. It means you have to have an appreciation for what God represents. So, in a sense, you're looking for reward. The reward doesn't have to be you're going to find gold. The reward could mean that you're going to feel good about yourself. You're going to feel good about your life. You're going to feel that your life has purpose and meaning. That's a higher level than just doing things out of fear of consequences. Here it's because you appreciate the value of what is good. That's the lower level of love. That's the lower level because it's basically based on consequences, but positive consequences, the reward that you're going to get. And that's the second level. It's one level higher than the one before, but it's still not the ideal. Then we graduate to the next level, which is, but you serve your master without expectation of receiving a reward. You do it out of love. But this is a deeper level of love. You don't, when you love your parents, or you love your children, you love your spouse, you love a person who's a very close friend, it's not because you're going to get something from it, it's because you really love them. It's not based on consequences. Or like, what are they going to give me today? Are they going to buy me a gift today? I'll love them. If they don't, I won't love them? No. It's based on you have a sense of closeness to that person. And when you're talking about God, it's a more sophisticated level than just love because of benefits that you get from it. That's the third level, the higher level. And then we reach the highest level. The highest level is the fear of heaven upon you. It doesn't mean fear. Again, I mentioned this last week, that the Hebrew word for fear could mean many other things, the lowest level of which is fear, but it could mean also reverence. You're in a sense of awe. It's because love, even on the highest level of love, it's motivated by ego. You have to be somebody to love another. Love means ultimately that the other fills in your space. You're missing something. If you ever hear people who are in love and say, my life is not complete without you. And that's a pretty sophisticated feeling, but it's still based on your ego, and not in a negative way, in a positive way, that my being is not complete without the other, without God, without my spouse, without my friends, without those who are my loved ones. But it's still filling in your space. The highest level is where you could nullify your being. You could sacrifice, you give everything away for the other, where you're left without anything. Like a mother will sacrifice her life, run in front of a car to grab her child out of the way of the car, giving up her life. You can't say that that's based on her ego, because she's going to get something out. She's getting nothing. She's losing everything, but she'll sacrifice for the love of her child. And that's the highest level of a relationship with God also, where we do things not out of fear or out of selfish love or out of altruistic love, but out of a sense of total surrender to that which is higher. And let me mute these people. In a classroom, you can't get everyone to be silent, but in the machine, you can mute people.
They should have a mute button for students.
So those are the four different levels that are hinted over here in this mission over here. And life is about graduating, maturing from one level to another. Sometimes we go to the one higher level, but sometimes we have to be able to fall back to the lower level. We're not always that motivated. We're not always that sophisticated. So we know that there are 4 levels, and each level is positive. One is more positive than the other. Then it said that the fear of heaven should be upon you. Why does it use the term heaven? Why doesn't it use the term the fear of God should be upon you? Why is the usage of the word heaven instead of God? Now, it obviously refers to God, but why heaven and not God? So some of the commentaries say that what gives a person a sense of awe, where do you get the idea that God is so great, and where do you become struck with awe and reverence for God? Maimonides says when you reflect on nature, when you look at creation, when you look at the heavens, you look at the stars, you look at the universe, you can't help but coming away with a sense of awe, knowing that God created the universe, knowing that God is the one responsible for everything, the earth and the heavens. The heavens are just a lot more powerful when you look at the vastness of the universe. When you look at the sun and the moon and the stars, and you realize how many light years away they are and how big they are. And it's in our prayers we have the expression "Ma gadlu masecha Hashem," how great is your handiwork, O God. Ma rabu masecha, how multifarious, how so many things. We have so many celestial bodies. They're just, we can't even count the number of stars. We haven't even found all the stars yet. We haven't exhausted. There's still more and more. When you realize that, and that all came about through God's creation, that gives you a sense of the awesomeness of God, and you reach that level. If it would just say the fear of God, the reverence for God, the word God doesn't tell you anything. Doesn't define what makes you feel that sense of awe. When you talk about the heavens, that does have that effect. Then we turn the page to the other side. This is the 4th paragraph. Yose ben Yoezer, a man of Tzreida. It's not to say that he wasn't a woman, but it means he was a citizen of the city called Tzreida. And Yose ben Yochanan, a man of Jerusalem, means he lived in Jerusalem. They received the tradition, the oral tradition from them. Who is the them? Antignos and Shimon HaTzadik. Shimon HaTzadik was succeeded as the leader of the Jewish people by Antignos. And these 2 Yoses were students of both Shimon HaTzadik, and they were colleagues of Antignos. But then when Antignos succeeded, they became his disciples as well. It's an interesting phenomenon that sometimes you can be a colleague of someone, and then your colleague becomes the teacher. The likelihood is that you're not going to want to be a student of your colleague. But when you realize your colleague is so much greater than you, so superior to you, and if you're humble, you will become a disciple of your colleague. And there are many stories in Jewish history where that happened. Rabbi Akiva was a student of Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehoshua. These were the 2 greatest rabbis of their time, and Rabbi Akiva was a student, together with so many others. And then Rabbi Akiva became a colleague of his teachers, and his former colleagues became his students as well. This is a pattern that repeated itself very often, which points to the humility of the students, that they were willing to become disciples of people who were their equals, or at least as colleagues, but may even have been younger than them. That's not uncommon. At any rate, these 2 Yoses received the tradition from both Antignos and his predecessor Shimon HaTzadik. Now here began a new era. Until this point, there was a single leader. Shimon HaTzadik was the leader of the Jewish people. He was the head of the Sanhedrin. He was the head of the supreme Jewish court. He was the leader, spiritual leader, and political leader as well. Antigonus succeeded him singularly as the leader. But when Antigonus passed away, they changed the system. Historians could discuss why they changed the system. I'll give you a theory. And the system was that the Sanhedrin was led by two people, and they're called the zugos, the pairs. One was called the Nasi. Nasi means the leader. In Hebrew today, we call the president the Nasi. He's the exalted one. He's the one on top. And the second in command was called the Av Bezdin, the father of the court. What was the difference between these two? These were the two greatest scholars. The difference was that they split up the leadership into two. The Av Bezdin, the father of the court, was responsible for the inner doings of the court. He was much more involved in the adjudication, in the judging, and the legislation. He was the one who was the internal leader. The Nasi, although he was also involved in the doings of the court, he was more the external leader. He was the one who represented the Jewish people to non-Jewish authorities. He was more of a leader, not just a leading scholar as the Av Bezdin, but he had more power than his deputy. So from this point onward, till many generations later, then we have Hillel and Shammai, for example. That was the same system. Hillel was the Nasi, Shammai was the father of the Bezdin. He was the second one in command.
The template actually seems very similar to Moses and Aaron.
Well,
Aaron,
yeah, you could say that. You could say that, yes. So anyhow, they were the ones who received the tradition. They lived at a very crucial time, because what was happening now, and this is the tragedy of Jewish history, that whenever things start going well, something happens and things start to break down. We already discussed how Alexander the Great conquered Israel, and the Jewish people were very much beholden to him because he was a benign leader when it came to the Jews. He let them, instead of destroying the temple, which he was encouraged to do by the Samaritans, he did not do that, and Jews named their children after him, Alexander. But little by little, Greek culture began to infiltrate. Once you're under Greek control of Alexander and his successors, Greek culture started to infiltrate into the Jewish community, to the point where Antiochus, Epiphanes, I think was the title, he banned Judaism. Now, it didn't happen overnight, it happened little by little, and it only happened because the Jewish people themselves became Hellenized, became influenced and assimilated. So these two rabbis lived at the time when the Greek Empire, the Syrian Greek Empire, the Greek Empire is split into a few parts. The Syrian Greek Empire dominated the Jewish people and legislated laws against the Jews. To make things worse, the Jews themselves became Hellenized and supported the Greek domination. At the same time, there was also the rebellion of the Sadducees. I mentioned this last week. That Antigonus had two students, one was Tzadok and one was Beitos, and they took his words and twisted them to mean that there is no reward, there's no afterlife, and they rejected the oral tradition. And it's not clear, and I had someone speak to Dr. Schiffman. Dr. Schiffman is one of the leading historians of that period, and Dead Sea Scrolls and everything. And my question to him was, what was the extent of the cooperation between the Sadducees and the Hellenists? Did they work together? Were they disparate groups? And he didn't really have a definitive answer. He thought they did have some influence from one another. At any rate, these were two groups, whether they collaborated or not, and began to impose themselves on the Jewish people and to ban Judaism from one extent to another. In another class I mentioned the fact that the Greeks initially banned three things. They banned keeping of Shabbos, circumcision, and Rosh Chodesh, the beginning of every month, which is celebrated by Jews. They banned that celebration. And then from that point onward, they banned everything, the pain of death. This Rabbi Yose ben Yoezer, before we even go into what he said, was a martyr. He was murdered, he was executed by the Greeks because of his publicly defying their orders not to teach Torah. This is a familiar theme in Judaism. Generations later, Rabbi Akiva was likewise executed because he taught Torah publicly, together with 9 other rabbis who we memorialize every Yom Kippur in our prayers. We talk about the 10 martyrs. But these were early. This was an earlier sage. So, knowing that these 2 rabbis lived at a time when there was persecution and banning the study of Torah, that might shed some light on their teachings. So what did this Yose ben Yoezer, we're going to just talk about what he said. He used to say, "Let your house be a house of meeting for the sages, and sit in the very dust of their feet, and drink in their words with thirst." So it sounds like he's promoting the importance of learning Torah, which he was, obviously, and being close to the sages. Now we understand a little bit what he was saying over here. He was saying, in spite of the fact that the Greeks are trying to outlaw Torah study and ban it at the pain of death, you defy that. But how could you defy it? So one explanation is that this is exactly what his first point is. You can't go to the house of study, you can't go to the synagogue, because they're going to find you there and kill you. So let your house become the synagogue, the house of study. Let your house be a house of meeting for the sages. Meet with the sages in your home secretly, because initially the Greeks only banned public Torah study, but they didn't stop you from studying Torah in your home or keeping Judaism in your home. Actually, later on, not too much long after this, the Greeks even banned observance of Judaism in your homes. And this is not a well-known thing, but one of the reasons is, one of the traditions of lighting the menorah is lighting it at our doorposts, because the Greeks realized that the Jews were observing Judaism in their homes. So how do you stop that? They removed all the doors of the homes, that no Jew had privacy. So if they kept any mitzvah, if they lit Shabbos candles, if they put on tefillin, if they did anything, they would be observed and they would be executed. But at this point, it's apparently the homes were still safe and secure. So the first thing is that your house should be the meeting of the sages. That's one possible interpretation. But let's extend this to any situation, even when there's no ban against Judaism. There's no ban against Torah study. But there's still the insidious influence of the outside world that could affect Jewish people and their observance of Judaism, which is what happened in the 19th and 20th centuries. In these 2 centuries, secularism infiltrated Judaism, and it even infiltrated the synagogues, and it infiltrated the Jewish schools, where they were teaching, distorting Jewish ideas and Jewish values, because they were using secular values to describe and influence Jewish values. So how do you protect yourself against the street? How do you protect yourself against the outside? You do it by making sure that your home becomes a center of Jewish learning. How do you make that a center of Jewish learning? By asking the scholars, the rabbis, the sages to come to your house and teach Torah in your home. Now, not everyone could do that, because there's not enough people who could open their homes to all this. The number of sages are not enough to fill up every Jewish home. So how do you get your home to be a house full of sages? So one of the answers to that is you have Jewish books. One of the Rebbe's 10 mitzvah campaigns was to have Jewish books in your home. So you're surrounded by Jewish knowledge. And inevitably, you might pick a book out and open it and read it. Not like some people who go to the bookstore and says, I just need covers. My bookcase is 3 feet wide, and I need 3 feet worth, and I'd like green covers. Just give me the covers. I'm not interested in what's in the covers. No, we need to look into what's in the covers. And if you're surrounded by these books, you will... It's almost unavoidable. You will read a book and it'll influence you just by being in the atmosphere of Jewish books, of Torah books. I'm not talking about novels. Just because a novel has a Jewish protagonist doesn't make it a Jewish book. Because some of these novels are very non-Jewish, in spite of the Jewish names that are included in the books or the Jewish author. But when you have Torah books in your home, you can't help it but you're influenced. It's like bringing the sages into your home. Obviously, if you could bring the sages in your home, have private classes where you invite the rabbi to come to your home and have a class and invite your friends. I'm advertising that we can make that available if you want. That's the ideal. And this is the fact that it's one of the first teachings in Ethics of the Fathers tells you how important it is. The greatest tragedy of Judaism, and listen to my whole point because you're going to get shocked when what I'm going to say now, is the synagogue, is the temple. They are the greatest tragedy. Why are they the greatest tragedy? Because it took Judaism out of the home and said, our home doesn't have to be Jewish. It's the synagogue. That's where I'll be Jewish. Now, I have nothing against synagogues. Some of my best friends pray in synagogues. But the idea, a synagogue was intended as a oasis. When you're outside your home, you have a place to escape to. But the ultimate place where Judaism flourishes is in the home. That's where you observe the Shabbat. That's where you observe kosher. That's where you observe the holidays. That's where you raise your children. The synagogue is a secondary institution to the home. And that's why the first teaching of Yose ben Yoezer, especially in a time of crisis, is make sure your home is a Jewish home. Make sure there are mezuzahs on the doorposts. Make sure there's Jewish books in the home, and especially if you can get living Jews to come into your home to spend time speaking and learning about Judaism, that's the ideal. In the Talmud, it's very interesting. The Talmud discusses many different discussions of Jewish law. And every now and then the Talmud will tell you, this was discussed in the attic of this rabbi's house. That's where he would gather his colleagues and they would discuss Jewish law. Sometimes the Talmud will tell you, on the porch of Rabbi so-and-so, they discussed this question. Why is it important for me to know that they discussed it on the porch? Because even when they were, what do people do on a porch? That's a time when you're casual, when you're sitting and you're basking in the cool spring climate of Buffalo, and you're enjoying the outside, the outdoors. It's very casual. That's precisely where they would gather with their colleagues and discuss matters of Jewish law. They would bring the Torah into their casual life, into their homes, to the porches. If they would bump into each other in the streets, they would discuss Jewish matters, not just in the house of study, which they had plenty of. What's the second teaching? Sit in the very dust of their feet. What does that mean? So simply it means you should follow them. The first teaching is you should bring them into your home. But it's not enough. They're not always going to be in your home. So you have to follow them wherever they go. Look to go to places where they reside. Go to the synagogue. Go to the house of study. To follow them. And the expression, in the dust of their feet, in those days people didn't have paved roads. So when you would follow someone, you would pick up the dust of their feet. That's another way of saying follow them constantly. Don't just keep them at a distance. That's one interpretation. Some say that means something else. It means sit at their feet. that means that you should humble yourself to sit at their feet. In those days, people would sit on the ground. They wouldn't sit on chairs. Maimonides, when he describes the synagogues, he says in Spain, in Morocco, in Sephardic countries, the Jews would sit on the ground. And he writes that in France, they sit on chairs in the synagogues. So there was always a difference between Ashkenazic and Sephardic Jews. What?
They had carpets.
Yeah.
They may have had carpets. But
My father said in concentration camp, when they brought some Sephardim from Greece, that they davened on the ground.
Yeah.
And my father, who was from Poland, had never seen that.
Right, but that was a Sephardic custom, and that may be what he means over here. That sit, and when you're sitting on the ground, there's a lot of dust. So it's an expression of saying, humble yourself to sit on the ground. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to sit on the ground. It means to say, even if you have to sit on the ground to learn from them, and it's not so comfortable, it's a little bit. The dust is going to be flying around. Be prepared to do that. That's how far you have to go to learn and not just keep a distance from the sages.
Is there another way to look at this too? Because when you say make your house a house of meeting for the sages, doesn't mean you're necessarily participating. It's like you offer your home for a parlor meeting. But he's saying no. When the sages are there, then you should be sitting in the dust of their...
Very good. Yes, that's very true. That it's not enough to invite them to your house and then you go out to the movies while they're debating in your home. You sit at their feet and learn from them, and you'll pick up something. It'll rub off on you. A third interpretation, given by the commentary called Midrash Shmuel, is that the word for dust in Hebrew, avak, is also connected to wrestling. We're going to soon learn about it next week, where Jacob is wrestling with the angel. And when you wrestle, in those days you would wrestle not on concrete, you would wrestle and the dust, you would throw up the dust, would fly all over. So that's an expression used when you wrestle. That if you sit at the dust, if you learn from the sages, because you have them in your home and you're constantly listening to them, and eventually you'll be able to wrestle with them. Studying Torah and discussing Torah with your colleagues is a form of wrestling. You're arguing back and forth. And this is the music that Jews grew up with constant wrestling, verbal wrestling with your colleagues. If you go to any yeshiva, you'll see hundreds of students, and even large yeshivas where you can have 1,000 students in one big, huge room, and they're arguing with each other constantly. They're studying together and they're arguing questions, answers, arguments back and forth. That's the wrestling of Torah. So if you have these people in your home, you will eventually be able to match them and argue with them. That's the greatest feat. If someone is a beginner and he says, what is your goal in terms of your learning Torah? My goal is that I should be able to argue with the rabbis. Argue cogently and even win arguments. Yes?
You don't learn anything from somebody who agrees with you 100%. You learn by the discussion with somebody who has a different frame of mind.
That's exactly what the Talmud says. When Rabbi Yochanan lost his prized disciple, Reish Lakish, he grieved to the point where he died because of his grief. He lost his mind. It was terrible. It was so one of his students tried to console him by telling him that everything that you taught, I can prove you're right. I can bring you dozens of proofs that you're right. And Rabbi Yochanan says, I'm not impressed by that. I don't gain anything. I know I'm right. I don't need you to prove to me I'm right. I want you to prove to me that I'm wrong, as Reish Lakish used to do. So you're 100% right about that. Then he says, and drink in their words with thirst. What does that mean? In the physical world, if you're thirsty and you drink a lot of water, you're not going to be thirsty anymore. You can only drink so much. You have to wait until you can become thirsty again. But when it comes to Torah, the more you drink of the waters of Torah, the more thirsty you become. The more you want And the analogy used is a fish. Fish are always in the water, yet when it rains, they jump out of the water and they open their mouths to get a few drops of rainwater in them. I don't know what the biological reason for that is, but that's the metaphor. The metaphor is that when it comes to Torah, the Torah is likened to water. It says in the prophet Isaiah says you should go to the water. When you're thirsty, go to the water. It doesn't mean water, obviously. If you're thirsty, you go to the water. It means to the water of Torah. Torah quenches our thirst. But as it quenches our thirst, it makes us even more thirsty because Torah has no limit. The more you know of Torah, the more you want to know. There's no such thing as a person. I knew people, I'm sure some of you may have known such people as well, that were great geniuses when they were young and they studied Torah day and night, but when they got older they became even more absorbed in the Torah. They never stopped learning. They couldn't imagine themselves not learning. They never said, I'm going to take a vacation from learning. I just spoke to a yeshiva student the other day, and he told me about a certain rabbi. What was his vacation like? When he was on vacation, instead of studying the text that he taught in the yeshiva, he studied other texts that he didn't have a chance to teach in the yeshiva. That was his vacation. Changing the topic of study, but not stopping to study and taking it easy. That wouldn't be enjoyable. That wouldn't be pleasurable. Just to sit on a lawn chair and bask in the sun, that would be painful. Because even when they're resting, they're studying Torah. Now, just one other point. Shimon HaTzadik established that there are three things that the world stands on: Torah, service to God, which is like prayer, and acts of kindness. His disciples, and his successor and disciples, are taking all these three and amplifying. Like Antignos said, you shouldn't serve your master with the intention of getting a reward. That relates to avoda, to service. What's genuine service to someone when you're not looking for the reward? The reward is not important to you. That's the ultimate goal in terms of service. Yose ben Yoezer is talking about Torah. What is the ultimate in Torah? The ultimate in Torah is when Torah becomes part of you, that you have it in your home. It's not just a place to go because it's some side thing that you do. It's part of your very existence. Just like your home defines who you are. We mentioned this in an earlier class. The Talmud says a person without a home is not a complete human being. Homeless is worse than hunger in terms of your human dignity. A hungry person is in a pitiful state, and we have to help them, of course, but can have dignity. A person who is homeless has no dignity. His humanity is being challenged. And that's more painful because an animal could experience hunger as well. But an animal can't experience the loss of a home the way a human being can. If it's a home is a shelter, yes, it's open to the elements, so it's painful. But the reason we need a home is not just because it protects us from the elements, as it would for an animal, but because it's what gives us our ability to be ourselves, to be totally human. So what Yose ben Yoezer is saying, the home that makes you who you are, makes you a full-fledged human being with all the dignity of a human being, is not a complete home unless you have Torah in it. That's what makes your home complete. So the home is the ultimate human dignifier, and it's made complete when you have Torah in it, Torah absorbed in the walls of the home. Just an incident that I just heard the other day. I knew this before, but I just heard it repeated again. When the Rabbi suffered a massive heart attack in 1977, and all the doctors, about a dozen doctors, said they can't treat him unless he goes to the hospital. He absolutely refused to go to the hospital. And till this, and this Dr. Laun from Harvard, he was in Moscow actually treating one of the Soviet leaders, and he was brought to the Rebbe, and he told the Rebbe, I agree with you, you're better off not going to the hospital. And the Rebbe told one of his doctors, do you see the books in this room? You see the desk upon which thousands of people send their petitions for blessings? He says, all this is absorbed into the room, and that's what's going to give me my recovery. The power that you instill in the walls of your home, literally in the walls of your home, by making your home a place where you have holy things going on, holy books, holy people, holy prayers, not just Torah, but all things that are spiritual and holy, it has an effect on the people in the home. The mezuzah, of course, and that's why it's so important that the home becomes the center of your Jewish life. Doesn't mean that the synagogue is not important, in spite of what I said before. I could change my mind. I didn't have to change my mind because I meant it in a way. Relative to the home, the synagogue is secondary. But the synagogue is very important, especially if someone, for whatever reason, doesn't have that kind of a home. They should certainly go to the synagogue and the house of study and the Jewish Discovery Center.
There you go.
I was asked by the director to promote it.
Rabbi?
Yes.
I often have told people that the Reform Jews and conservative Jews want the women to be rabbis because they have not made the home the center of Jewish life.
Well, they're not Reform or conservative Jews. There's only one kind of Jew, and it's a Jewish Jew.
But it's a different
But that means
life.
members of Reform and conservative temples.
Okay, but they haven't learned to make the home the center of Jewish life, where the woman...
Well, that's what I was referring to before, that in 19th and 20th centuries, what happened due to assimilation is that the home lost its Jewish identity, and people still felt the need to be Jewish in some way, so they created external structures.
Synagogue and a community center. But the people who hold on to the Jewish life is centered in the home. The woman is the one running everything, and she doesn't feel a need because there is so much responsibility.
Right. In that regard, people ask, are women second-class citizens in Judaism because in Orthodox community, women do not become rabbis. Women don't have those public functions. And the answer to that question is, if you judge Judaism by its public by the public arena, yes, they are second-class citizens, but Judaism isn't determined by the public, it's determined by the private. The private roles, that means the roles in the home, are far more important than the public roles. In fact, throughout Jewish history, the greater the Jewish leader, the less he wanted to be a leader. They had to force people to become leaders. They had to do it because there was no one else. It was absolutely necessary. They would rather engage in a private expression of Judaism and not be public. But secular influence changed that around, that the more public you are, the more famous you are. If you're a movie star, if you're an athlete, if you're a politician, if you're someone in the public arena, that means you made it in this world. And in Judaism, no, you made it if you're a private person and you were able to turn your home into a holy place. That's called making it in Judaism. Any questions?
I have.
How come you never ask questions?
If I don't ask, it's not full lesson. My father came from Shedrin, and his first language was Yiddish, and he studied in Heder. After that, yeshiva, little bit. After that, came to military, Second War, and of course he was officer in military. We live in, of course I grew a little bit in Bobruisk because I was born in Bobruisk. It's Yiddish city, Yiddish town. So for this reason I know little bit Yiddish. But all people around me, when we live in North, were not Jewish people. True, I didn't know about God. I never know. We didn't talk about Torah. But all my life, it started, I talk about this when I came to America. And all my life, I had some rules of my life. And when I start to study Torah and 10 Commandments, I realize, in general, I follow this. Why? Because it's comfortable. You make good relationship with other people. So when you talk about level, first level, I afraid to God, second level, third level, what is my level? If I follow this, automatically, because it was my education and I don't know, education and family, it's not education, it's style of life. And my parents were model for me.
Yeah, you were taught values without emphasizing God and Torah because the Soviet Union didn't allow you to do that.
Yes.
But now that you're in America, and God bless America, you have the freedom to learn about Judaism and do it on a higher level. Not to lose what you had before. What you had before was good, but this is a higher level.
It's almost like he's able to study the why. He knew the how. Now he can study the why.
He knew some of the how because, unfortunately, he couldn't get a good Jewish education in Russia. Okay, everyone, any questions on Zoom?
Thank you, Rabbi. I like
Okay, everyone, have a good day.
Okay.
Oh, you're so simple, though.
I was just a little confused.
Tomorrow night is the public
The
class.
first one, master,
Nuggets.
is that the level of?
No, the first one is,
What's
do not be like servants, period.
do not, okay.
Servant serves out of fear.
Just
Don't
because
be
he
like
doesn't know,
servants.
that's like the lowest level.
That's the lowest level. The next level is serve master and expectation of receiving reward. That's
Lowest.
second level. That's the lower level of love.
Okay,
But be like servants, serve the master without the expectation of receiving reward. That's the higher level of love.
okay.
Where you don't care for the reward, you're just in love with someone. But that's still not the highest. The highest level is with the fear of heaven, which doesn't mean fear, it means the awe of your total surrender to God. Something
Yes.
so where there's no ego left.
Okay.
That's the highest level.
Okay. And